this video is sponsored by MPB. I wanted one of these for blooming ages. I'm so excited. But first of all, let me explain why I sold my GH6, my baby. I have three needs as a photographer slash videographer slash whatever I am. First of all, I need a camera with phase detect autofocus to do my YouTubey stuff, because once you go phase detect, you really can't go back, and it's essential now for this sort of stuff. And at the moment, that is the S5 Mark II, which is full frame, makes me feel like a right fraud on the Microphone Nerds channel, but soon we will have a solution, hopefully. The solution I am hoping and praying for, and I know nothing, I'm just a nerd, is an updated GH6. Maybe it's a GH6 Mark II or GH7, whatever they want to call it. I feel like it's long overdue for that line of camera to get some phase detect autofocus like the S5 Mark II and now the G9 Mark II. Need number two for me personally is I do need a camera with a fan or thermal management, because I do still shoot weddings in summer. We do occasionally have a summer here in England, and I need something that's reliable. The last thing I would ever want to do is have a camera overheat in the middle of a ceremony or something. I would die. And that's literally the only reason why I'm not pulling the trigger on the G9 Mark II. Because that camera ticks so many boxes in so many other areas. Like, I could use it as my talking head, I could use it for wildlife, I could use it for travel, but I couldn't, in good conscience, use it in the middle of a summer's day filming a ceremony. It's not what it's designed for. Do you know what is designed for that? The GH line. But then need number three, arguably the most important, the joy. My tiny cameras that come out on a day-to-day basis with me, the things I document my life with. Yes, I might need a little bit of clips here and there for my YouTube channel, but on the whole, I want something that can come out with me, is fun to use, and sparks joy. And that's why I sold my GH6 for this, the GX8. Now, I am hoping in the future, it seems logical that Lumix will make a camera that will cover bases 1, 2, and hopefully 3. If a GH line comes out that ticks all these boxes, I'm jumping. And I've got all the money left from my GH6 in savings, ready to either get the G9 Mark II, if nothing materializes, or a GH line if it does. But in the meantime, I'm gonna have so much fun with the GX8. So the reason the GX8 is going to be my trial tiny camera of choice, my everyday carry of choice for a little while is, it is tiny-ish. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's tinier than a lot of the other cameras I own. And you do have the weird EVF, you do have a flippy screen, you do have a mic input. So you can use this for talking head stuff, you can use this for video clips when you're out and about. It does shoot 4K up to 30p. You have weather sealing. So, I mean, aside from the fact that I've spray painted it to holy hell, I do think it would stand up in a storm. It's certainly weathered the spray paint pretty well. And it has IBIS with an asterisk, which I'll talk about shortly in more depth. And I got the GX8 used from MPB for $374. Bargain. It's just that price point where it's like, oh, it's a nice treat. It's a nice treat, and it's something that you might need to save for, but it's also not too expensive that you don't mind defacing it. Maybe that's just me. Here is how to deface your camera in 5 badly planned steps. First, you cover all your buttons and everything with masking tape and blue tack, front and back, and then you do the first coat very lightly on the front and then the back. And then you decide you want the top to be purple and realise the purple paint won't show up on the silver, and then you realise you're gonna have to paint it black. And at this point you think, why didn't I just buy the black version? This is stupid. This is all going wrong. And then the two-tone paint actually comes out pretty nice, and it all works out in the end. So is this camera the poor woman's Pen F? And is that a bad thing if it is? If you're familiar with Micro Four Thirds on this channel, you know that the Olympus Pen F is one of my all-time favourite cameras. It's stylish and tactile and beautiful, but even now, even long after it's been discontinued, it's blooming expensive. And it's not perfect for what it is for the price, in my opinion. And it's weird because on paper, the GX8 has almost everything and more. Both cameras have the more modern 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor. Both cameras have IBIS. Both cameras have flippy screens, tactile dials, and a more vintage look. But the GX8 is weather sealed and the Pen F isn't. The GX8 has a mic input and the Pen F doesn't. The GX8 has really robust video features and the Pen F definitely blooming doesn't. And you do have more of a standard traditional grip with this camera. The Pen F, as lovely as it is, does feel a little bit lost in my hands because it's so flat. And of course, no flash, but we have this to play with, so we can add that to the montage, can't we? And in the words of the late, great David Thorpe, at the end of his comparison review between the two, he summed it up perfectly. And he said, "The Pen F feels like a better camera, but isn't. The GX8 doesn't feel like the better camera, but is." Mic drop. So if you're looking for a Pen F feel for a camera at a fraction of the price, literally a fraction of the price, I think you can buy 3 of these for one of them, the GX8 has a lot to offer. So let's go back to that awkward little asterisk over the IBIS that I mentioned earlier. For photo, you do have IBIS on the GX8, and you do have dual lens and sensor stabilization. So if you have a stabilized lens, it's even better. However, when you're shooting video, you don't get sensor stabilization for whatever reason. So with HD, you have lens stabilization and electronic, and when you're shooting 4K, you only have lens stabilization, which isn't ideal. But as always with my tiny cameras, I'm using the video features as a nice little bonus rather than a necessity. So it's good to have, but it's not perfect. It does have Cine-like D as standard, so it's a good video profile, and I've hacked it a little bit because it's just something I do. And then when you turn it off, we get this little angry, "Ah, what have you done?" sign. I've just put it in service mode because in the UK we are in PAL format, which means we get 25p and 50p. And I tend to use 24p and I like 60p. I think if you can get 40% speed in your slow-mo rather than 50, you may as well. So I've pressed a lovely combination of buttons and unlock service mode, and I can do 60p on this even though it's a UK edition. So what about the layout of this camera? The dials on this camera are a little bit weird. They're all sort of on top of one another, which is weird, but it's all one-handed, which I really like. The power button is on this side, unlike the OM1, unlike the Pen F. And it does make for a really tactile street photography experience because you've got your exposure compensation on the right, you can turn it on one-handed, you've got everything you need all on one side, and that's something I really value in a camera. Even recently when I was shooting the OM1, which is delightful, I love the OM1, the Owen System OM1, you'll notice on this camera, and it's a really high-end camera, the power button's on the left. So when I was shooting sort of wildlife and stuff in the Jeep in Safari, today is not the day I'm going to stop talking about Safari either apparently, you had your camera to your eye, or maybe you stopped and you were having a chat while you were waiting for something, and then you did have to sort of reach over and turn the camera on and off you go. And when you're shooting with longer lenses in particular, it was a pain in the backside because you could lose your composition very quickly. Whereas with the Lumix competitors, the G9 Mark II or whatever, you can just turn it on and you don't have to change where you are composing. Little things like that are very down to personal preference, but I do think over time with me using a lot of different cameras, it is something that I do value. So ergonomics, awesome. More function buttons than you can throw a stick at. This one at the front, and then you've got some at the back, and even one on the top of the dial. So as you can tell, I've shuffled around my gear a little bit recently. I sold my GH6 and my original S5 to MPB, and I bought this from MPB, used for an absolute bargain. So if you are looking to shake things up a bit, or if you would like to try a GX8 yourself, then go over to MPB with the links in the description. They are a worldwide company, and grab yourself a bargain. I've used them a lot, like a lot. All of the tiny cameras are from MPB. You get a 6-month warranty with all of your purchases for a little bit of peace of mind, and I absolutely love having sort of bought 1,000,001 things from them, that every single package is really sort of environmentally friendly. They wrap everything up in paper and it's all recyclable. It's good. You're saving the world, saving your bank balance, and supporting creators like me. What's not to love? So check that all out below. They support my channel and I love them dearly, and I would never recommend something that I don't absolutely love and adore myself. And let's get back to talking about this. So let's talk about the original flaw of the GX8. This is unearthing some micro four thirds tea of time long gone. And it's not overly a problem anymore, thankfully. But when this first came out, the GX8 did suffer from a little bit of shutter shock. If you've never heard of that before, it's when the mechanics of the camera inside cause the image to be slightly blurred as you take the photograph. This only happened in the lower shutter speeds, so like 50th of a second to like 150th. And obviously it's not ideal because number one of any camera, regardless of any other bells and whistles, is you want it to take sharp photos. But Lumix very quickly brought out a firmware update and it turns it to electronic shutter in those areas that are affected, which is a little bit of a workaround, and it's not ideal because, you know, electronic shutter sometimes comes with its own issues like rolling shutter or banding if you're in sort of electronic lights, but it's not a problem anymore. I'm only bringing it up because if you do buy one of these used, make sure you update the firmware straight away so that isn't a problem. Oh, and one more point on the shutter shock thing. It tended to be with longer lenses and telephoto lenses. If you're sticking to primes like I do anyway, it won't be an issue anyway. Cool. You know, if you want to be one of those cool street photographers, oh yeah, how cool do I look? I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just not. I think the benefit of this comes from if you are shooting on a very bright day and you're in a very low angle situation, or if you're on a tripod. And also another use case of this would be astrophotography, because my tripod tends to be in a weird angle when I'm shooting astrophotography, so it's pointing up at the sky with a really wide angle lens. And being able to extend this and check everything's in focus would be awesome. The GX8 is one of the few cameras that has 4K photo mode. Now, is this a gimmick or is it cool? I'm not entirely sure myself, so I'm giving it a go. 4K photo mode gives you the ability to shoot at 30 frames a second using this camera, and it does it in the form of a 4K video, and then you can sort of choose the JPEGs out of any of the frames. So this enables you to get lots of fast action photographs when the mechanical shutter or the electronic shutter in standard modes wouldn't keep up. There are 3 ways to do it. You have the standard press the button and then press it to stop, which is very self-explanatory. Then we have start-stop mode, so you press start, the bird's having a drink, it flies off into the sunset, you press stop when the action's done. But then most interestingly, and most reminiscent of how the technology has progressed in the G9 Mark II now, is you had a pre-burst mode in this, like nearly 10 years ago. So there's a mode called pre-4K photo where action's happening, press the photo, and you get 1 second of footage before the shutter and 1 second after. I think for its time, that is such a cool feature to have, even if it is only JPEG. Next month, I am going to take it on a big road trip around America. I mean, it's not that big of a road trip, we're only going to 2 states, but still, it's better than where I live. So I'm going to do a full travel photography sort of in-depth review of this in the following weeks, so stick around for that. And in the meantime, check out my Olympus Pen F review. This is probably the direct competitor to this camera. It's awesome, but it is a little bit pricey.